Hello everybody. I have talked about fall gardening tasks before in videos such as this one and this one, but in today's video I want to cover my top 5 gardening tasks that I am tackling in my Ohio garden during this late fall, early winter time period. Now, these are tasks that even if I get nothing else done in the garden this time of year, I'm making a point to make sure that these things get done. Now, my first task is pretty obvious, and that is some light cleanup. Now, my approach to garden cleanup at the end of the season has evolved quite a bit through the years. And while I used to want to come in and make sure that any and all plant matter was stripped out of the garden at the end of the season, my approach has a much lighter touch nowadays. I do try to clean up any plants that were diseased or had insect infestations. I also try to pick up any fallen seedy fruit, such as peppers, squash, and especially tomatoes, as those seeds will sprout up like weeds come the spring. However, if you enjoy volunteers, go ahead and let those fruit lie. It's kind of amazing to see the genetic variability that you get popping up come the springtime. I cleaned up some of the plant residue in here this year because I was trying to trap and relocate a bunny that had been living in here since early summer, and there were just too many places for it to hide. But for the most part, what you see left in my garden right now will stay here till next spring. As I've mentioned before, when I do remove plants from the garden, I try to always cut them off at ground level, leaving the roots to rot in the ground rather than pulling them up roots and all. I've also started to just compost everything in place. I used to have a compost pile, which was a good distance from the garden, and I would move everything out of the garden to that pile. Now, with the exception of the stuff the chickens can eat, I have various compost piles directly in my garden. This makes the work easier for me, and it keeps all of that precious organic matter in the garden. I've mentioned before too that I'm a lazy composter, so I don't really manage these piles at all, but eventually they do rot down and create beautiful new beds. I've also found planting pumpkins, winter squash, and gourds in these piles after they've overwintered, but before they're completely broken down, works really well. However, again, if you've got plants that had disease or insect infestations, it's probably a good idea to get those out and far away from the garden to avoid spreading those issues any further next year. My next task is the final planting of the fall garden season, a task of utmost importance. But first, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Hisea. When I am tackling these garden chores, a dependable work boot is a must-have. And because I'm gardening in Ohio, I never know what kind of weather is going to get thrown at me. So I have to have a work boot that is comfortable, waterproof, and breathable, so I can work outside all day, no matter what kind of weather gets thrown my way. Luckily, Hisea has created a full line of boots that are perfect for whatever I need. This time of year, I'm switching back and forth between the versatile neoprene rain boot, easy to slip on and tackle garden chores even in the rain and mud. They're fully waterproof, flexible, and comfortable, and I love this fun design. And when the really harsh, snowy weather sets in, I'm reaching for my Hisea upgraded rain boots. This pair is insulated with adjustable back gussets for a tailored fit and stretch fit top line bindings to seal in warmth. But thanks to the breathable mesh lining, my feet don't overheat. The molded outsoles offer stability and shock absorption, but are still incredibly flexible, and they're 100% waterproof, ideal for cold, rainy, snowy, and icy conditions. Best of all, Hisea offers a 100-year lifetime warranty and a 100% keep warm and dry guarantee. Now, if you're finding yourself in need of some dependable work boots this time of year, head over to hisea.com and check out the full selection and use my code Jenna15 for 15% off all Hisea products. Now, back to the garden. Now, gardening task number 2 is a planting that I find myself pushing back later and later each year, and that is planting my fall garlic. Now, I used to always plant garlic right around Halloween, but over the course of the last 5 years or so, I find myself pushing that date back further and further to where, on average, I've been planting right around the second week of November with really good results. Interestingly, 2 years ago, I did an interval planting test where I planted the same variety of garlic at 2-week intervals, starting in early November through mid-December. I also did a very early spring planting, and all those fall plantings performed equally well. I had great size on the bulbs, great yields. The only one that really performed any different was the spring, which, not surprisingly, it yielded much smaller bulbs. Now, overall, what I see happening here in Ohio is our falls are staying warmer longer than they used to even 10 or 20 years ago. So for me, pushing that planting date back works really, really well. This fall in particular, that has been the case. We're a little closer to average right now, but just 2 days ago, we were 26 degrees above the average. We're also still in a period of severe drought. So at this point, I'm really just holding out, waiting for some rain. I'm hoping to get that garlic in. Still right around the middle of November, but we'll see if that happens. Now, if you want more information about planting garlic specifically, be sure to check out my garlic playlist here. Now, task number 3, this is the big one, the one ring to rule them all of gardening, if you will. If you've watched my older videos, you've likely heard me harp on this before, but cover those beds. Probably if I had to pick one thing, only one thing to get done in the gardening in the fall, it would be to cover my garden beds. The importance of this just simply cannot be overstated. Please do not leave that soil bare. Making sure that your soil is covered in the fall and really all year round is going to provide so many important benefits. It's going to protect from topsoil erosion and nutrient runoff. It's going to protect that delicate soil microbiome that we are working so hard on establishing, and it's going to prevent a lot of those hardy, tough, overwintered weeds from popping up and taking over, amongst a myriad of other benefits. Now, my go-to covers in the fall are typically either mulched leaves or green cover crops. I didn't get as many cover crops planted this year due to the drought, but I do have these sections which I got established in a mixed cool season cover. Typically in my area, the latest date for sowing overwintered cover crops like winter rye, wheat, and triticale is the last week in October. But since it's been so unseasonably warm here, I'm going to try to still get some winter rye established. Now, some of these cover crops, like the rye, will survive through the winter and resume growth in the spring. But some, like the mustard or the tiller radish in these mixes, will winter kill and simply rot away through the late winter months. Both versions, winter kill and overwintered cover crops, offer a form of soil surface protection as well as a lot of other benefits that I talk about in more detail in this cover crop playlist. I also mentioned that leaf mulch, and leaf mulch is a great example of an abundant free resource that has so many good things to offer to the garden. Now, I hope to cover all of those benefits as well as the ways that I specifically utilize leaf mulch in an upcoming video, but to generalize, one of the easiest and best ways to make sure that your soil surface is covered in the fall is just to add a nice heaping helping of leaf mulch. Now, my preference for annual vegetable garden beds is to use a chopped leaf mulch, simply running those fallen leaves through the mower before adding them to the soil. This helps them break down faster so that by the time I'm ready to plant in the spring, I don't have a ton of tough residue left over. The chopped leaves also seem to be much more resistant to blowing away than whole leaves. Now, here on our property, we're dealing primarily with hickory, but we do have some walnut, oak, and maple as well. Now, I've heard other folks say that things like walnut and oak should be avoided in the garden, but I have to say that in my case, used in this mixed species blend, I've had nothing but stellar results. As the leaf mulch breaks down over time, we end up with this beautiful substance called leaf mold. This is basically garden gold, which is highly beneficial to the garden soil and its microbiome. Clean straw and hay will also work, as will natural wood mulch or wood chips, and grass clippings if you happen to have any left this time of year. And if all else fails, and for some reason I can't get a hold of organic materials, I have been known to just put a silage tarp over the top of my beds for the winter. It's not nearly as beneficial as using a cover crop or any of these other organic materials that I've mentioned, but it does do wonders for stopping those hardy winter weeds from taking over. Now, I have to make sure to remove that pretty early in the spring to let my heavy clay soil dry out, but it still is beneficial and it beats leaving the soil bare through the winter. Task number 4 is critter control. Late fall into winter is an ideal time to tackle issues with critter populations, especially those of the rodent variety. Critters like voles, mice, shrews, and chipmunks can cause a lot of damage in the home garden. Anything from eating and digging up seeds to chewing on roots and tubers, making whole plants disappear. Even their tunneling can be destructive to plant roots. Now, in a balanced ecosystem, there is certainly space for all of these critters. The trouble tends to arise when our ecosystems get out of balance. A lot of times this can happen because of a lack of natural predators, such as hawks, snakes, owls, even domestic cats, foxes, anything that is going to prey on small rodents. With a lack of these natural predators and an abundant source of food, these populations can explode out of control. Voles, for example, can have 5 to 10 litters in a year, each one of those litters consisting of, on average, 10 young, and those young reach sexual maturity in a month. So you can see how, when left unchecked, that can just get completely out of hand. Now, most of these critters that I mentioned don't hibernate through the winter. Chipmunks are the exception, and even they wake up every couple of days to find food. So late fall through winter is a great time to trap these rodents, as they're relatively limited on other options for food. And hopefully we can bring populations down to a more reasonable level before trying to plant the early spring garden. One of the best ways that I've found to deal with shrews, voles, and mice was shared with me by a savvy gardener named Maureen, and it's ingeniously simple. This consists of simply placing sunflower seeds or other bait in the center of tubes, and I started with cardboard tubes, but then upgraded those with cut lengths of PVC pipe. And then we simply place 2 basic wooden mouse traps inside each end of the tube. In theory, I think you could construct a slightly larger version of this trap for chipmunks using rat traps instead of mouse traps. But for chipmunks, the general consensus seems to be using the sunflower bucket is one of the best methods. For this, you simply fill a 5-gallon bucket about halfway up with water, sprinkle sunflower seeds to cover the surface of the water, and place a ramp up to the lip of the bucket, sprinkling a few seeds along the ramp. I personally have tried various chipmunk traps, including the chipmunkinator, traditional live traps, rat traps, and the bucket technique, and have not had great luck with any of them. So currently, I'm just trying to learn to coexist with these very mischievous little critters. Now, task number 5 is to prep new beds for spring. Right now is the prime opportunity to get new beds ready in time for spring planting. Now, I like to use a couple of different methods to achieve this. You can check out this video for those methods, but this season I am favoring the hugelkultur beds. I've got one back here that I have filled to the brim right now with logs, sticks, garden residue from my cleanup, and my chicken bedding and manure. But by the spring, this will all be partially broken down, and I'll shovel this fill dirt back over top and be ready for planting. Now, when converting lawn over to garden beds, now is a great time to start solarizing and or smothering out lawn and adding organic matter. And bonus, if you have chickens, keeping them on the area where you want to create new garden beds through the fall and winter can be very beneficial as well. They will scratch up weeds and grass, eat insects, and apply a heaping helping of all natural fertilizer in the process. Now, here is a bonus tip, and this is something I should be tackling, but I am not. Many of you got a kick out of the nightmare that is my barn storage area in this video. I'd like to say that I remedied that problem and I did have it under control for a while, but we're right back to disaster city again. Frankly, it's for the same reason that I struggle with cleaning the house, and that is because I would rather be outside doing literally anything than be inside cleaning, whether that's in the barn or in the house or anywhere else. But this is a very important thing to get under control. And this time of year is a great time to tackle this. Properly put away and store things like insect netting, frost cloth, irrigation and hoses, pots and seedling trays. Clean, sharpen, and oil your garden tools. And for the love of Pete, Jenna, break down these cardboard boxes and stack them in a neat pile and get rid of all the trash that has accumulated over the course of the season. Now is a great time to inventory all of the supplies as well and make sure that we have everything on hand that we're going to need for the next gardening season. Related to this, it's not too early to start thinking about seeds and plants for next year as well. Gardening catalogs seem to drop into that mailbox earlier and earlier every year. And I try to aim for placing my seed orders in particular no later than about mid-February, but I start sometimes as early as December. Now, given that I am starting my earliest seeds, onions, I'm looking at you, in December, and with things like cole crops, hardy brassicas, greens, things like that, not much later, I'm starting those indoors in February. I like to get my seed orders in and have everything on hand early in the season so that I know that I've got it when I need it. This also helps to ensure that that variety that you were drooling over is not sold out or out of stock by the time you go to order it. Well, that wraps up my top 5 gardening tasks for the fall and winter, but I'd love to hear from you. What do you think the most important fall gardening tasks are to tackle? Drop a line in the comments below and let me know. And if you found today's video helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.